Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, e-commerce and data protection. I am Esmeralda Estrada from the AZ SBDC network, and I'm a program coordinator here. We have Gina Couillard on the call with us. She is an associate state director here at the AZ SBDC network. And we have our guest speaker today, Jacob Blacksten, and you'll be hearing more about him. So as we get started, I just want to go briefly over some of the things that the AZ SBDC offers to small businesses here in Arizona. So the main thing we do here at the AZ SBDC is provide confidential one-on-one counseling to small businesses. And it's for anyone that is starting their small business to developing, if they need financial assistance, searching for sources of capital. We also have Arizona Apex Accelerator, and they help with government contracting, getting those licenses for like WASB and 8A contracting. So they help with federal contracting and with local contracting. And we have Jacob Blacksten here today, and I'll hand it over to him so he can get us started with our topic of the day.
Awesome, thank you very much. So welcome everyone. Like it was mentioned, my name is Jake Blacksten and I'm out of the Delaware SBDC. And today we're going to talk about e-commerce and data protection. So my background is in digital forensics and cybersecurity. So I have been on the kind of defense side of all of this for quite some time now. And really what I found was big business had really good security measures to protect themselves and had a lot of money to throw at people like myself to protect themselves. However, that came from what I saw most often was the small business often got squashed because of that. So in 2018, I decided that I was going to educate all small businesses to protect themselves. So that way, big business, if you're doing business with the government or anyone like that, doesn't have basically a scapegoat so that they don't point fingers at you, and so that you are not their weakest link and you protect yourselves. So with that being said, today we're going to talk about e-commerce and data protection, and specifically how you are going to create your e-commerce platforms or secure the already existing ones that you have, and what it might look like in terms of data protection. So before we get started, there we go. Just some learning objectives. We're going to go over what is data privacy. So every state has a data privacy law, and it's usually unique to the state. Some states have bound together and created multi-state data privacies, but usually it's up to the state to dictate what they consider data privacy. So we're going to go over what that is, what the outlook of the digital economy is right now. So all of the transactions that are happening online and what that looks like. Current threats to e-commerce. So what are the threats that we're seeing from attackers around the world? And then implementing best practices. So what can you do to make sure that your systems are secure and get all that low-hanging fruit so that way you're more secure than the next guy. So with that being said, let's go to the next slide, which is what is data protection and privacy? So basically it's, well, on the slide is measure the principles and implement it to safeguard personal and sensitive information. So in the heart of data protection and privacy is you protecting not only your identity, but your customer's identity. And this is all personal identifiable information, also known as PII. So name, email address, social security number, credit card information, really anything is considered that is unique to an individual is considered data privacy or data protection. And the safeguards that you put into place to protect that. With that being said, every state has their own unique version of what PII might look like. Some are very strict on PII being, even if a customer's first name and last name is leaked from your data center or your set of information, then that is a data breach. Others aren't so strict on that. And in order for it to be considered a data breach, it is a leakage of something that's a little bit more sensitive, like a social security number or something like that. So you want to take a look at your state's data protection and privacy laws. If you're, most of your e-commerce, so if you sell in the EU at all, you also have to adhere to the nice data privacy law, GDPR, which is, I always forget and murder that acronym, but GDPR is how you're going to hear it. GDPR is what you have to do in order to do business abroad in a foreign country. Specifically the EU. They are a little bit more advanced than us here in the States as far as data privacy and protection. They really honed in on making sure that businesses control the privacy and protections of the data that they collect. So they created the GDPR to protect their customers. GDPR is very similar to our individual state data protection laws, except for they went above and beyond and decided to make it a blanketed program that is across all of the countries within the EU. We don't have that luxury, and so depending on the state that you go in, your privacy laws are slightly different. But what I would recommend is making sure that you at least adhere to the state in which you reside and then going from there. With that being said, why is e-commerce security so important? So this comes from a risk assessment by LexisNexis, which is a very popular risk assessment company. They saw that there was a 56% increase in human-initiated attacks in growth from last year to, or I'm sorry, 2021 to 2022. The 2023 numbers aren't out yet. So all of my statistics are from 21 to 2022. There was a 56% increase. What that means, that 56% increase is 905 million attacks on e-commerce websites to date. And what I mean by human initiated is there was a person behind the attack. It wasn't automated. It was a direct target, human initiated, human wrote the code, a human initiated attack, a human was behind the doors, mucking about. That's what we mean by human-initiated attacks. Then there was a 195% increase in automated bot attacks. So I think we're all familiar with what bots are now. They are only increasing in sophistication. Well, in the year from 21 to 22, there was 1.4 billion attacks on e-commerce sites across the world. So that was a 195% increase from in 1 year. So imagine as AI gets more sophisticated, what that bot attack will look like. And then 82% of all attacks are human elemented attacks. What that means is it was the use of stolen credentials, phishing, misuse of credentials, or simply an error. So a human did something that opened up a hole in your system that allowed attackers in. And so that accounts for 82% of all attacks. We here in the cybersecurity realm often refer to, unfortunately, humans as the weakest link in your security practice. And that's because humans are sometimes irrational when it comes to certain decisions, and they make decisions that aren't predictable sometimes. And they typically go after what is easiest. So they'll put their passwords on sticky notes, or they'll save it to their notes app on their phone, or they'll do something that's very insecure that attackers will leverage, knowing that a human is going to be your weakest link. Then 93% of all attacks are from, of those human elemented, are from stolen credentials. So small businesses' biggest method of compromise is the use of stolen credentials. And that may be that you use one account, that username and password for your Canva site, or whatever your e-commerce site, or whatever it is, I know it gets expensive to have multiple logins, because usually if you have the lower tier of something, it only gives you one login. So you create that generic login and you share it amongst the team that needs it. That is the issue right there, because that creates one person can just get a hold of that account. And there's no way for you to know, was it legitimate login? Was it you who logged in? Was it your account manager who logged in? Or was it an attacker? So there's no way of really knowing what happened. And that's what accounts for most small businesses attacks. So growth in online sales. Within the last year, in 2022 specifically, we saw a significant, well, throughout the pandemic, blew up the growth of online sales. But within that department, you have e-commerce platforms, which are Shopify, WooCommerce, Etsy, Etsy is actually becoming one of the most popular ones for people who don't want a full store. Amazon Marketplace. All of these are pathways for small businesses to get their product out there. And that grew exponentially during the pandemic and so far after that. With that, we also had a global reach. Online sales have removed geographic barriers. So you now can, and if you would have been a brick and mortar, you would only get that local area to you, or if you're a larger state, only the certain cities and towns around you. Not many people would travel multiple hours to the store. Now you can sell wherever you are within the country or across state or across the country lines. All of that blew up as well. Mobile e-commerce. Actually, mobile e-commerce has surpassed web browsing for the first time, I believe was in 2022, meaning that more people purchase and navigate the web and your online stores through their mobile device than any other device out there. Mobile devices account for both tablet and cell phones. We can get more granular. We do have data that kind of tells us whether or not it was a tablet or a mobile device, but we just kind of rope all that into one. Funny enough, we can track everything online. That's the other thing that makes digital advertising so important in social media influencing marketing, because you can track a user from when they get onto their computer, from the search term that they looked up, to the ad that they saw, to the web pages they went on your site, to then making the purchase. You can track an entire customer's journey, whereas in a physical location, you could never do that. You didn't know where they came from. You didn't know what they were looking for when they got to you. You couldn't personalize your store to their specific needs. And now you can, which we also see that is kind of cluttering up the noise and making it much more difficult for people to sell products now, because everything is so personalized, and it gets very complicated and expensive to be so personalized. But I am assuming all of you have had an experience where you are talking with somebody and your phones are on the table or something, and you mention a product and you're like, oh, I should look into that. And then not 12 hours later, you get an ad for a product that you have never searched before. Microphones listen to you. Alexa listens to you. Not like Big Brother and, oh my God, everyone's listening to me, but they are designed to hear keywords to make your user experience more influential. So search terms, Google, every time you type into Google, Google is storing all of those search terms in their database to then give to advertisers on what you're looking for and to customize your user experience. Digital customer analytics, like I mentioned, you can personalize everything. Online marketplaces, so you've got unlimited possibilities on where you can shop, how you shop, what platform you use, whether it be Square, Clover, Shop Pay, Apple Pay, Google Pay. You've got unlimited versions, Venmo, and then customer reviews. Customer reviews have become even more important in today's society because people look at the reviews before they go and make a purchase. And now with everything online, the ability to capture reviews has become significantly easier for you, but you have to do it in a easier way than just sending out surveys. And make sure it's not multi-question and it's only 1 or 2 questions. But either way, so growth in the online sales market has just boomed in all of these different areas across everything, every industry, every product line. So what we like to then think about is the perspective shifts. So you as a small business are focused, your mindset is focused on finding out the best technology to streamline your business operations. So getting QuickBooks, getting Square up and running, getting any point of sale system that you're using up and running to track your inventory, to store your customer data, figure out how you're going to send emails more efficiently. All of that is what's going through your head. Customer data to personalize experiences. What data are you going to collect? Why are you collecting it? All of this is something that you as small business owners are thinking about. What attackers are thinking about is basically all these systems that you're using as a small business, they all have to tie together and they're usually not under the same roof. So you'll buy a subscription with QuickBooks and you'll link it to your Square account. And then you'll maybe have if you have WooCommerce, you have a WordPress site. So then you plug in your Square and QuickBooks into the back end. So you've got all of these different pieces that all link together. What that means is there are now multiple routes of access to your personal data. So since you'll have databases, you'll have your customer data and maybe your Square, but you'll have emails and other personal information and maybe SurveyMonkey or MailChimp or wherever else you store customer data. You've got all of this information across all of these different platforms. And to understand where all that information is and how they're protected, you are bound to do a misstep at some point. So attackers know that, and they're going to think about, okay, they have all of these systems. These are the most common systems used. This is the information that's typically stored in that information. So if they want email addresses, they're going to go after your SurveyMonkey. They're going to go after your MailChimp. They're going to go after your Constant Contact. They're not going to pay any mind to QuickBooks or anything like that. But most attacks are financially specific. So then okay, QuickBooks is one of the largest, QuickBooks, Square, Clover, they're the largest point of sale systems out there. So if I want to attack them, all I need is the credentials of a small business to get access. Inventory data and product IDs. So if you implement an inventory tracking system, if they want inventory data or they want product IP, if you've got it, they can get it from there. All of these things are in the attacker's mind thinking, okay, if I want this, I know small businesses use this system, so I'm going to attack this, and vice versa. So what I suggest is that you have to, as a small business owner, when you think about implementing a new system, think about what information is going to be stored in that system and how it's going to link to others, and what would an attacker find of value to that. So data security in the digital economy. What we are thinking about is compliance with regulations. So all of you, like I mentioned, have a data privacy law that governs what you can and cannot do and what happens in the event of a data breach and what is considered PII to your state and vice versa. All of that is part of compliance. And specifically, if you do things across overseas, then you are governed by GDPR, which means that your site now has to comply with GDPR requirements. Nice thing about Square, Shopify, BigCommerce, they all kind of build that natively into their system. So it's like a checkbox that you would turn on and off, but you have to make sure. So it's not as simple as if you want to do GDPR that you just check that box and now you become compliant. They make sure that all the code and the cookies banners and all of that shows up, but it's your job to make sure that you have a data privacy protection page on your website. It's your job to make sure that you have terms and conditions. It's your job to have all of these things that they require in part of the regulation. So you've got all of these different regulations on what to do in the event of a data breach, what to do in the event of protecting a data breach, and what data is considered private. The other thing is prevention of data breaches and cyber attacks. So there's a lot of different things that you can do to prevent a data breach and a cyber attack. I will tell you right now, you're not going to prevent them all. I manage our Delaware SBDC website. On a given day, I can have hundreds of thousands of attacks to our website. And it's not a human just trying to get into the Delaware SBDC. It's not like we have a lot of valuable information in the back end, but it's bots just looking for holes and attackers looking for any information that they can get. If they get into the Delaware SBDC website, that's bad. I didn't do a good job of protecting our site. But what I do is make sure that our systems are kind of separated from our website. So even if they got into our website, really all they could do is change our website pages or redirect certain things. It's still a lot of damage that they could do, but it's not necessarily leaking personal information. The most important thing that attackers could do if they get into your back end is redirect people to a different site. So for example, our website is delawaresbdc.com or .org. If they got into our website, they could then go in and change. Basically, when you would go to delawaresbdc.org, you not see our website, you see a copy of our site that is requesting them to put in information. That request then gets sent to the attacker. So that's why website security is so, even if you don't store it in your website, it's important to protect. The other thing is preserving customer trust. So in the event that you are breached, customers tend to lose trust in you. They believe that you didn't do a very good job at making sure that their data was protected. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the attack on Target. This was a while ago. I think it was 2008, 2009, so years ago. But they're one of the most popular and most people know. They fortunately had the brand behind them to recover from a data breach. You as a small business might not, because they lost a lot of customers that day when they had their data breach, but they had enough to sustain them, and then which meant that they could build back that trust. If you lose your trust overnight from let's say 75% of your customers, can you sustain your business with that 25% until you regain that customer trust back? Because customer trust is, especially for small business, especially plumbing, HVAC, that's how you build your business. And if people don't believe in you, then obviously you're not going to be in business for very long. Business continuity and resiliency. This is another thing that I work very hard with. We make business resiliency plans here with Delaware SBDC. So we determine small businesses' needs and figure out where all their kind of holes are. And we write an actual plan on what happens in the event that something like this happens. If you've been around for a while, you probably already did a business continuity or a resilience plan. And this always used to be what happens in the event of an earthquake or a tornado or a hurricane or fire. But now we've added cyber into that, because just like a natural disaster, cyber can take you down for the count unexpectedly. And then lastly is protection of confidential information, making sure that you not only protect your customers' data, but you protect your own personal data as well, your usernames, your passwords, your information, your account logins, all of that. So common threats that we see in e-commerce are data breaches is kind of data breach is a catch-all term. Data breaches is because usually something else happened, but data breaches can be one of the biggest threats. And that's really what they're going after in a small business, is attackers know that you are probably, oh, my lights just went out, the weakest link in the supply chain, which is fine as long as you are protecting yourself and protecting your small business. So you are, as a weakest link, need to make sure that you are not weaker than the other small businesses that they're doing business with. So in the case of the Target scandal the Target breach that I was talking about, Target got breached because they had an HVAC company, a small business HVAC company, do business for one of their stores. Target had a portal that had all contractors log into to track their time and do all of that. What they didn't do was protect that portal's backend. So basically, once an attacker got into that portal, they were able to kind of snake their way into Target's main systems. So from Target's perspective, yes, that was bad and they needed to fix that. But what ended up happening is Target came down on that HVAC company, saying that their cause of the breach was because the HVAC company didn't do their due diligence to protect their information, that led to them getting into the Target system, which then ultimately led to the larger breach. So, and the breach was because an HVAC system got phished. Someone stole the credentials to their Target login information and then logged in as them on the Target system. So that caused a major breach, not for the HVAC system, but for Target themselves. The other thing is phishing attacks. So segue into phishing. If you're not familiar with what phishing is, it's those emails that you get that kind of look a little weird. They usually have a lot of spelling issues. They're pretending to be somebody that they're not. They're asking you to click a link, download a file, open a file, do something on the system. Phishing attacks are, like I said, the most popular way of compromise for small businesses. The way to protect against those, we will kind of talk about in a little bit, but phishing attacks are one of the most popular things for social media or e-commerce stores, because you send, hopefully, or maybe you don't, send a lot of emails, like an empty cart, an abandoned cart email, or you send promotional emails, or you do all of these things within e-commerce to send out these emails to unpublished sales, that kind of stuff. Phishing attacks happen because of that. All of those emails you send out, somebody can just replicate something that looks similar to that, try to get your distribution list, and then send out a fake email in that time frame. Malware and ransomware. Malware and ransomware is, if you had antivirus on your computers, you know what malware and ransomware is. But basically, it's ransomware and malware are these different types of computer bugs that can get into your system, and they do all types of different things. So malware ranges from basically taking over, controlling your computer mouse, downloading secretive keyloggers is what we call it, which is basically a software that runs in the back end of your computer, but records everything that you do on the keyboard. So eventually you will type your password into a website, and a keylogger is recording all of that information and then sending it out to somebody. All of those pop-ups that you randomly will get with all of these different ads, that's a type of malware or type of virus. Ransomware has become very popular within the recent years because that has been in the news the most recent. Ransomware is a type of malware, but it is very specific in what it does. If you get ransomware, you typically know you have ransomware because it will lock your system down and tell you that you have to pay a certain ransom amount in order to get your system back. This ranges from fake ransomwares, where it's just a screen that kind of goes over your actual computer, and if you know how to kind of exit out of it, then it, in the essence, is not actually encrypted any of your stuff and you're fine. But then you've got the more sophisticated ransomware, where it will actually encrypt everything that's on your computer's hard drive, your customer's drive, anything that's in the cloud. It'll encrypt any data it can get its hands on, and then threaten to delete it or not unencrypt it without payment. That is a problem, because then if you are an e-commerce site and you do everything completely online, and now all of a sudden all of your customer data is encrypted and you don't have the keys to it, you can no longer send emails, you can no longer make transactions, you can no longer do anything with your customers without getting that information. And if you don't have backups or anything that we'll talk about later, you are kind of dead in the water on that, because you can't do anything without paying the ransom, and it's a shot in the dark on if you pay the ransom, you'll even get your data back. There's actually recommendations that you don't pay the ransom, because if you pay the ransom, you're kind of just waving a flag saying that you are vulnerable, you don't have backups, you don't have other areas that you can kind of restore from, so you become more of a target. Then insider threats. This is actually more common in recent years than it has been. Insider threats are people who are stealing information that are within the company. I had a case once with a larger company where someone claimed that they were not taking it, they were fired, they were then seen taking information out of the office, both digitally and physically, and giving it to a competitor. That's an insider threat. You as an e-commerce platform selling a very unique product, you might not have, if they left with your product information, it might not hurt you all too much. But what if they left with your passwords and usernames into your customer databases and things like that, and they started poaching all of your customers? What if they left with your sales revenue and your bottom line numbers and took them to a competitor and said, hey, they can't, if we run for 3 months at a reduced price, they wouldn't be able to sustain it and they would go out of business. So there's ways that insider threat information for you is compromisable. So insider threats actually a very high probability now with smaller businesses, because people don't feel that they're valued. So they will take the information that they believe that they're owed and then go somewhere else where they think that they're of value. And then social engineering. Social engineering is when you get a phone call or basically any type of personation of somebody claiming to be somebody of importance to get and divulge information. For example, Microsoft is one of the most socially engineered companies, mainly because I don't know if you've ever gotten a phone call or a text message or an email from Microsoft IT support claiming that they found a virus on your computer and they need to remediate it. I can tell you 100% that Microsoft will, unless you called Microsoft about a problem, Microsoft is not proactive enough to call you to tell you that they identified a problem without you telling them first. So if you ever get an email saying Microsoft support and that you need to pay them $50, $100 or whatever it is, and they'll clean up your system, 9 times out of 10, it's a scam. So social engineering is just an impersonation of somebody to get some information out of you. We had a case here once where our senior director's email was compromised through a phishing scam. So usually you pair these two together. Phishing and social engineering are typically paired together. Through a phishing scam, they got our director's email compromised and then started sending emails to people within our organization claiming, hey, I need you to send or wire money to this place, no questions asked. And since it was coming from a director, no one would bat an eye. But social engineering is that second piece where they're leveraging some type of information that they have collected from you. And let me tell you, it is very easy to get personal information from the internet. People put it publicly all the time. Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter have been the downfall of the social engineering, or the uptick in social engineering if you look at it from the opposite side, because people voluntarily put all of that information out there. When you're going on vacation, who you've been with, who your friends are. I recommend that if you ever have security questions on when you were born, what your birth date was, who your parents are, that names are, all that, if it's easily found out through Facebook, don't use those security questions, because attackers will do their homework. So consequences of inadequate security. Financial loss is the biggest one. If you are down for any amount of time, you typically lose sales. You typically have a hefty bill that you have to pay that coincide with legal and regulatory issues. You have fines you have to pay. You have sales you couldn't get. You typically might have to pay for customer in the event that a data breach does happen and it's a certain level. So here in Delaware, we have House Bill 180, which is our data privacy law. If I forget what the exact threshold is, but if a certain amount of customers' information and specific data is breached, you then are required to pay for monitoring, credit monitoring for your customers for a year. And so that is on your tab. The other thing is damage to reputation. Obviously, people aren't going to trust you. Your reviews start to sink. You've got all of that loss of customer trust. People stop buying from you, and then legal and regulatory issues. GDPR is no joke. I know we have data privacy laws here in the States that are, they're also no joke, but GDPR specifically, they will come down hard on you if you do not follow their regulations. So if you're doing anything overseas where you are subject to GDPR regulations, you better believe you have everything to a T for those regulations. So strategies for risk mitigation. So what can you do? I know I talk about a lot of, and I try not to scare people, but at the end of the day, that's kind of what happens is people get scared, but it's not something that's super difficult for you to solve a lot of these issues. There are a lot of different things that you can do that are very simple, that are going to protect you significantly. One of them is to implement secure payment gateways. So I believe most of you will be using the standard payment gateways like Apple Pay, Shop Pay, Google Pay, Shopify's payment method, Venmo, Clover's payment method, any merchant services payment method. So if you've got Bank of America, PNC, they all use Clover's version. As long as you're using a reputable, secure payment gateway that is very specific, I'm going to say here, PCI compliant, PCI being the key word, making sure that all payment portals are PCI compliant, then you are fine. This only comes into play if you have a very special store and you have to use a specific payment portal to accept certain currencies or something, certain kind of other types that we don't necessarily see often. What I recommend, avoid using any payment portal that is not PCI compliant and that is not a well-known portal. So if you're gonna try to do an e-commerce site very cheaply and you're going on some iffy, questionable, not so reputable sites to build your e-commerce platform, that could be fine. But if they recommend their own version of a payment portal, that's the red flag. You need to be able to link to some type of certified PCI compliant portal in order to protect your customer's payment. Utilize encryption and SSL certificates. if you're using Shopify, if you're using Etsy, if you're using Amazon Marketplace, if you're using BigCommerce or some of the more well-known e-commerce platforms, most of this is taken care, again, for you. Encryption is standard for Shopify and some other big players. SSL is provided when you purchase your account. And what I mean by SSL is when you go to a website on today's browsers, so Google, Safari, Chrome, any of those, Chrome, Firefox, any of those. You go and you see that little lock icon that is usually on the left-hand side of your URL browser, and it either has a green check mark or there are different colors depending on what browser you're in. But as long as you have a lock icon or a shield, or I think Firefox uses shields, then you typically have an SSL certificate. If for whatever reason there is a red X, or it's yellow, or whatever it is, if it's not green or it doesn't say verified, it usually warns you that the site that you're on does not have an SSL certificate, and you should avoid doing any type of transactions on that site. What that means is an SSL certificate is basically an encryption level that is protecting the traffic between your computer and the end destination of where it's going, so that attackers can't necessarily see what's happening in your transaction data. If you are a WordPress site and you use WooCommerce, that's where SSL is not always guaranteed, or if it is, it's not always turned on by default. So if you're WordPress and you use WordPress.org, you use Bluehost, you use GoDaddy, you use Wix, any of those platforms to host your WordPress and then WooCommerce plugin, SSL certificates are now standard and they come with the packages, or you can buy them separately. But you also have to make sure that they are turned on and active on your site. Also, with WordPress sites, you can turn on even additional layer of security by encrypting all of the data on your site, which is highly recommended. Regularly update your software and systems. So like I said, Shopify and BigCommerce and these Etsy, you can't really update that software because that is cloud-based software. They do that on their end. But if you're using WordPress and you're using WooCommerce and you're using any type of plugin into a website, a payment portal or anything like that, you need to make sure that those plugins are constantly being updated, because that is where attackers will leverage the most. They will find that weak chain link and go after it. So making sure that you update your software, your systems, and that doesn't, most of your systems are going to be web-based systems, but that also includes your web browsers. So Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Firefox, Safari, they all need, the browsers themselves need updates as well. And if you use systems that are outdated on them, you can also kind of leverage issues into your actual online systems. Conduct employee training on security best practices. So this is the biggest route to protect your information from your, like I said, phishing was your biggest issue with human interaction. The biggest thing to actually solve that issue is employee training, unfortunately. Everyone hates going through those long cybersecurity training videos, which I agree. I have to write them and I bore myself when I write them. So we try to do it in 2 minutes or less, and we try to do it as upbeat as possible. So employee training, I'd say do this on a quarterly basis. There are actual companies out there that will do this regularly for you. You can KnowBe4, FinSecurity, there's platforms out there where you can pay them, they'll link into your system, and then they'll constantly phish your employees and then kind of train them based on if they clicked the link or they didn't, what they should have looked at, what they didn't look at. There's also free versions, like Google has partnered with a company called Jigsaw, and it's a free phishing training tool where you can just have your employees, your customers, or not your customers, but your employees go through and just sit, how would you identify a phishing email? What do you look at for it? And this free Google tool, and there's others out there, can show you, make sure that you look at the sender's email address, make sure that you're looking at where it's being directed to, make sure that it's free of spelling mistakes and grammar, and make sure that you're actually supposed to be receiving an email. If it came out of the blue, maybe you should double check. If you ever get a link to a bank's website or something like that, maybe not click the link in the website and instead go to the website that you use, or the link that you use on your browser. So for example, Bank of America is one of the banks that I use. I go to, every time that Bank of America sends me an email, I never click any of the links that are actually in their emails, because I don't want to run the risk of it being a fake email. So if Bank of America sends me an email, I'll open the email, look to see what it's telling me. If it's just a statement or something, then I will go over to bankofamerica.com myself. I will log into my actual browser that way, and then I'll look to see if there's anything that actually is needed. Implement access controls and user authentication. So password managers are super important. Making sure that you have unique logins, making sure that your passwords are not the same, making sure your passwords are not just sticky notes somewhere or in your notes app. It's very important to implement access controls that actually authorize your users to access that system. So unique accounts is the most easiest and best way. But I know that some accounts, like if you get the lower tier version of a lot of this stuff, you only get one account. So the best way that I know to get around that is pay for a Keeper, 1Password, some type of password manager software that allows you to centrally control your passwords and then share them with people that need access. But you can also revoke it. You can change it at any time. You can basically, it doesn't actually let others see the password. It just auto logs them in. Password managers are the easiest route if you only have one access. Back up your systems to cloud or offsite locations. This is a little less important for, again, Shopify or Etsy if you don't have a place where you actually need to back up your information. But if you're on a WordPress site or you're on something that has some type of backup data that you can do, it is very important that you constantly back up your customer data, your systems, whatever it is. Or if you don't think that you can back up the data, like let's say you're using Constant Contact and you can't back up the data because it doesn't necessarily, it's not physically your data, it's stored on their systems. See what they do or what types of terms and conditions they have for in the event that something is breached. Do they have offsite backups? How do they bring things back up? And if they say they don't have backups or redundant backups or offsite backups and they go down, then you lose your information. So making sure that they do what we suggest you do is just as important. So auditing that is very important. All right, so establishing a secure e-commerce strategy. I know we only have about 9 minutes, so I'm going to kind of do a quick overview of this, and then we will go to questions because I know there is a lot of questions that are just kind of trickling in. So establishing a secure e-commerce strategy, you need to conduct a thorough risk assessment. Go through and think, okay, what are all the systems that I have? What's all the information that I collect? What are all the different softwares that need to link to each other? Do an actual assessment of your systems and what you're doing. There's companies out there that will do it for you, but it comes at a cost. So you can just find risk assessments online that you can download, and it just kind of goes through what your systems are. Develop a comprehensive security policy. If you give out logins, if you give out devices, if you give out really anything that is company owned, there needs to be a policy on how to use that. So if it's a to log in, what's the appropriate systems that they can use to log in? What are What can they do with that login? How is it controlled? All of that needs to be written down. Choose reputable e-commerce platforms and service providers. So make sure that you're choosing a platform that is well known. So Shopify, eCommerce, BigCommerce, WooCommerce, anything with commerce that you've seen to date. SquareUp, which is Square's version, Squarespace, all of these are big names that typically are reputable. Just try to stay reputable. Regularly monitor security logs and alerts. This is a little bit more secure than I think some of you will go, but you at least need to have monitoring turned on. And what I mean by that is every time a user logs in, there should be a report. You might not have to look at that report, but you need to have that turned on so that way it logs a report every time someone logs in. So in the event that a data breach does happen, you can go into that report and see, okay, well, there was logins from Newark, Delaware, which is where I'm located, 20 times in the last week, but then there's one login to the same account from Russia. Obviously, I didn't do that because I've been in Newark the whole time. And that's your first line of defense. Like, okay, there's a place that logged into my account successfully and I wasn't there. So that's why logins or alerts, you can turn on alerts from Shopify and things to tell you whether or not an account has been accessed through a certain route or not. Stay informed about the latest security trends. So I'm not saying that you all need to be cybersecurity experts or anything like that by any means, but if, like I said, ransomware has been the most popular version of antivirus or viruses out there in ransomware, make sure that you know that. So that way you can train yourself on what that looks like, how it gets onto your system, so you know how to avoid that. So these are just, you'll be sent the slides so you can look at these, but these are some data breaches that were in the news. So Shopify did have a data breach a couple years ago, and it breached over 200 merchants on Shopify by a rogue member of support team. So basically they had a insider threat. They had someone who took a bunch of information and went to a competitor. WooCommerce had a vulnerability where if you would have patched and updated your system, it would have eliminated that vulnerability. But anyone who constantly stayed on that outdated version exposed themselves to this attack. So WooCommerce, Shopify, no one is immune to data breaches. So these links actually send you to articles. Shopify was very quiet about their data breach. There's not much to read about it, but they did have one. WooCommerce was very upfront about theirs. It wasn't actually a breach, but it was a vulnerability that they found that could lead to a breach. And so they recommended people do updates. And just some key takeaways: make sure that you have some form of security that should be monitoring your site. So if you have GoDaddy, Wix, you can buy a third party, or sometimes it comes with it now, a security package that checks for malware, antiviruses, that kind of stuff. There's tons of them out there. You can just look to see what platform they're recommending. Unique usernames and passwords per employee, per account, as well as two-factor authentication. So those, text messages and things, make sure that you have that turned on to eliminate your exposure. Backups and updates should be run regularly. So this is very important for anyone who's using a WordPress or a site that has to be hosted. You need to run your backups and updates yourself, even if it's a managed version of that, making sure that the managed provider is doing that. And then website encryption should be turned on. So either SSL or another form of encryption should be on as well. Most sites to date have SSL, but it is not always common. So making sure that you at least have it on your site, because Google will actually rank you lower if you do not have a SSL certificate. So I know that was a lot, but that is kind of what I teach my clients at the very first step of e-commerce security when they start thinking about going down this route, or they have been down this route and they need more help. So with that being said, that's all for me. I will read through your questions. So if there's anything else that needs to be said, we can go ahead and do that while I look through these questions, and then I'll answer them as I can.
All right, thank you, Jacob. So as you're answering those questions in the chat, I'll just briefly go over some key takeaways about the AZ SBDC network, or Arizona Small Business Development Center. So the AZ SBDC has locations throughout the state. We have 10 centers located throughout. You're more than welcome to go to our website here, azsbdc.net, to find out more information about us. You can request no-fee counseling through our website or sign up for future training programs similar to this one. And again, our website is here, or you could use our QR code right here. But we are on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. So you're able to find more information about us through those social media platforms. And again, thank you, Jacob, for joining us today and providing this information to everyone here today. You will receive a recording of today's webinar along with the PDF of the slides and any resources that Jacob might want to share with you all. And you will be receiving a survey of today's webinar. So if you could please give us some feedback on how this presentation was, or if there's anything that you're interested in learning about, this will help us to help you in the future. And again, thank you all, and thank you, Jacob, for joining us today.
Of course. If we have a few minutes, I will go ahead and answer some of these live because it's just easier. So one person mentioned SSL certificates. Does it matter where we get it from? That doesn't necessarily matter. SSL is relatively standard. What does matter is making sure that it is on and is actually working for your website. So whoever you choose to get it from needs to make sure that it is active on your site and actually encrypting the information. What types of vulnerabilities and to what level of risk are we opening ourselves up to if we're putting together our own WordPress website using WordFence plugin for security as non-developers? We actually use WordFence here on some of our sites as well. It's a relatively easy to use and pretty decent plugin. Making sure that that one stays, you have to regularly update that plugin though, because it's only as good as its last update. So as new viruses come out, that plugin will not be active or will not know about them. So constant updates is the most important thing. And that's, again, with how any antivirus system works. And how much should we worry compared to Shopify, WooCommerce, and the other big e-commerce website builds? I mean, I don't really know what you mean by that, but you shouldn't worry too much. Shopify, Etsy, these big guys are designed for this, and they can fix security holes a lot quicker than you can. WooCommerce is slightly different. They themselves fix holes as well, but it's only, unfortunately, the way that they're built, since it's a plugin into WordPress, their fixes are only as good as you updating your WordPress site. So I wouldn't worry too much about the different websites. They're all relatively secure, but they're only as secure as your employee training, as your user accounts, as your two-factor authentication, because if you're not protecting your own login information, the second someone gets in there, they can do whatever they want. Any recommendations on password managers or other tools to share with virtual assistants that adhere to higher cybersecurity standards? Keeper and 1Password are, so LastPass used to be kind of one of the biggest guys. They had a data breach. They're still very secure, but because they had a breach, we were told to no longer recommend them. So we don't recommend LastPass. I still use LastPass, so it's not like they're going down the drain. They're still doing their job, but a lot of people left them because security and trust. 1Password, Keeper, they're the kind of the bigger players in there. You really want the most secure platform out there, the one that is actually going to allow you to fit your need. They're all built relatively the same, but they all work slightly differently. If we decide we'd like to have one or more virtual assistants, especially if they're aboard in the Philippines or other areas, what measures can we put into place to ensure that they make our small business data more susceptible? This is where security policies and best practices and basically those documents on what they can and cannot do with that information is going to be very important, because in the event that something does happen, you can go back to that document and say, these were the systems, these were the procedures and the protocols they were supposed to follow. Because they did not do that, that led to the data breach. And that sometimes gets you out of a little bit of trouble. But policies and procedures are very important, how they use the system. And then in that instance, I would implement a password manager that allows you to share login information, or you're going to have to upgrade your systems to allow you to have a second login to whatever it is and give them that second login with some special auditing. Paying a certain comprehensive employee. Secondly, where would we find relatively affordable training to offer them? Like I mentioned, there KnowBe4, Fin Security, and a few others are big name people who do phishing security, but Google does have free versions. You can just Google around for free phishing trainings. And again, I am always accessible, so you can always email me and ask me if something is reputable or not, and I will give you my honest opinion. I don't know everything. Things come up all the time that I'm like, oh, I didn't know that that was even a thing yet. So, but I can look at it and I can give you my honest opinion. There are some open source ones, but they're not always the greatest. And do you have opinions among the various PCI compliant payment service gateways, which ones may be less secure? Most people, most payment portals, if they're PCI compliant, they are usually secure. Like they have to follow very strict standards. Stripe, Square, PayPal, like you mentioned, they all might have slightly different encryption methods, but they're all relatively standard when it comes to security. It's when you get into third-party vendors like China and Japan they're more susceptible to these types of things because they use third-party payment portals that aren't so strict. But here in the United States, we have the PCI compliance and we have these large payment portals that are relatively secure. So as long as you're using one of these, you should be good. And does e-commerce data privacy laws we have to uphold depend on where the LLC or the business was physically formed, where it's registered? So that's a good question. Since if you've done your research on LLCs, you probably have an LLC here in Delaware because of our nice Chancery Court, and it's just cheaper here. Typically, if your LLC is here in Delaware, you not only have to adhere to our House Bill 180 regulations, but the state in which you actually reside and do business in. So technically, what you should be doing is every state you transact business in, you should be following their privacy laws for that customer. But that gets very, very specific and very hard very quickly. So what I suggest is find the ones that you're doing the most common in, and then find the ones that are the most strict and follow those across the board. So Delaware is relatively strict. I don't know about Arizona, I have not checked, but I would go with the most strict one, and typically that's good enough. So it seems GDPR is the gold standard above and beyond even the most. Yes, GDPR is the gold standard. GDPR is 100%. If you can follow the GDPR, usually most US states, cybersecurity laws, we're going to fall into that. So if you can make everything GDPR compliant, 9 times out of 10, you will be compliant for the state in which you reside. And if a small business chooses to use WordPress.org to offer some digital product sales and a standard Asteris theme and using their very common Elementor Pro, and know our website link will be shared, website in Europe, and they're trustworthy, affordable plugins, we can rest assured we won't be sued on that end. For legal purposes, I cannot tell you anything about whether or not you're going to be sued, but as long as you're using the systems that you just mentioned, usually you are fine, because all of those systems are very popular and they're very good at what they do. All right, I think we're coming to the last one. If I were to guess, I'd imagine that less than 1% of small business vendors, business partners, content creators, and hygiene personally and as a company. This makes me feel extremely vulnerable. How do we find contacts that are operating at a high level in terms of protecting data, excellent policies, technologies? So this is unfortunately on the onus of you as a business owner. You have to ask whoever you're going to be partnering with to see their security practices. And if they're not willing to show you them, you might not go with them as far as doing business with them. Because at the end of the day, it's not 100% regulatory. So they don't have to if they don't want to. But as a business that now needs to, have them linked into my system or do something like that, I wouldn't probably go with them, because I need to rest assured that if I'm having anyone link into my system, that I know that they follow the same practices that I do. So it's a lot of the onus becomes on you to be as specific as you need, and you reserve the right to not do business with somebody if they do not hold to certain practices that you require. All right. I think that was everything. Again, if you have any questions and or anything like that, please feel free to email me. My email was in the link, but also it's also in the slides if you get those. My website here at Delaware SBDC, as well as North Star, which is our cybersecurity program on ASBDC's website, has a bunch of other information. So feel free to go to the website that is actually in the slides, and there's all kinds of one-pagers, do's and don'ts, checklists, items that you can use in addition to whatever Arizona already offers you on their sites as well. So thank you everyone for listening. And I know this is a topic that is sometimes not the greatest, but I appreciate all of you.
Thank you again, Jacob. And thank you for everyone that joined and stayed until the end. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.